In the tumultuous landscape of 20th century geopolitics, where revolution and repression collided, one name emerged from the shadows to become a symbol of calculated terror and unrelenting audacity: Carlos the Jackal. He was a man shrouded in mystery, a self-proclaimed revolutionary, and a figure whose exploits both captivated and horrified the world. This is the story of Ilich Ramirez Sanchez, the man who would become one of the most infamous terrorists in modern history. Join us as we unravel the chilling story of Ilich Ramirez Sanchez, better known to the world as Carlos the Jackal. Our story begins in Venezuela, where Ilich Ramirez Sanchez was born in 1949 to a politically active family. His father, a staunch Marxist, named him after Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, setting the ideological course of his son's life before he could even walk. Growing up in Caracas, young Ilich displayed an exceptional intellect, but also a rebellious streak. His father's devotion to leftist causes left a lasting impression, and by the time he was a teenager, Ilich had embraced the radical ideologies that would define his future. After attending elite schools, Ilich's education took a dramatic turn. In the 1960s, he moved to Moscow to study at Patrice Lumumba University, an institution known for cultivating revolutionary leaders from around the globe. Immersed in the doctrines of Marxism-Leninism, he honed his understanding of guerrilla warfare, geopolitics, and revolutionary theory. But it was his recruitment into the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, that set him on a path of violence and infamy. Under the mentorship of Wadi Haddad, a figure synonymous with international terrorism, Carlos was trained in the dark arts of sabotage, assassination, and covert operations. The PFLP, a militant Marxist-Leninist group committed to the Palestinian cause, became his ideological home. But for Carlos, it was also a launch pad to infamy. By the early 1970s, his skills as an operative and his charisma as a leader were becoming evident, and he quickly rose through the ranks. The world first heard the name Carlos in 1973 when he attempted to assassinate prominent Jewish businessman Joseph Seif in London. Although the attack failed, it marked the beginning of a career defined by audacity and brutality. Over the next few years, Carlos orchestrated bombings, assassinations, and hijackings across Europe and the Middle East, leaving a trail of chaos in his wake. His most infamous act came in December 1975, with the raid on the headquarters of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, in Vienna. Carlos and a small team of militants stormed the building, taking more than 60 hostages, including some of the world's most powerful oil ministers. The operation, meticulously planned and executed, brought international attention to Carlos and his cause. Demanding the release of political prisoners and the redistribution of oil revenues, Carlos negotiated his escape, boarding a plane with several hostages. The audacity of the attack and its successful execution cemented his reputation as a master of terror. As the media chronicled his exploits, the nickname Carlos the Jackal emerged, a moniker inspired by a copy of Frederick Forsyth's The Day of the Jackal, reportedly found among his belongings. Whether fact or myth, the name encapsulated the cold, calculating persona that Carlos cultivated. He became a shadowy figure of intrigue, evading authorities while maintaining a near-mythical status. Carlos's operations were often cloaked in ideological rhetoric, but they were also marked by opportunism and a thirst for notoriety. To his supporters, he was a revolutionary hero, fighting against imperialism and Zionism. To his detractors, he was a mercenary and a criminal, exploiting political causes for personal gain. The truth lay somewhere in between, a man driven by both ideology and ego. By the late 1970s, Carlos had become a fugitive, moving between safe houses in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and North Africa. He lived a life of luxury, funded by a combination of black market dealings and state sponsorship from countries sympathetic to his cause. But the world was changing, and so was the game of international terrorism. The 1980s marked the beginning of Carlos's decline. The Soviet Union, a longtime supporter of revolutionary movements, was losing its grip on global power, and Carlos found himself increasingly isolated. His allies in the PFLP distanced themselves from his high-profile tactics, viewing them as counterproductive. Meanwhile, Western intelligence agencies intensified their efforts to capture him, tightening the net around the once elusive Jackal. For over 2 decades, Carlos managed to evade capture, living under a series of aliases and protected by sympathetic regimes, but his world began to shrink. In the early 1990s, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, many of his safe havens disappeared, and his network of supporters disbanded. The man who had once been untouchable was now a relic of a bygone era. The end came in 1994 in a dramatic turn of events befitting Carlos's larger-than-life persona. French intelligence agents, in cooperation with the Sudanese government, orchestrated his capture in Khartoum. Bound and sedated, Carlos was whisked away to Paris, where he would face justice for his crimes. In a French courtroom, Carlos maintained his defiant demeanor, using his trial as a stage to espouse his revolutionary beliefs and proclaim his innocence. But the evidence was overwhelming. Convicted of multiple murders and acts of terrorism, he was sentenced to life in prison, where he remains to this day. The story of Carlos the Jackal is a complex one. A tale of idealism turned to extremism, of a man who became both a symbol and a cautionary tale. His actions left a lasting mark on the world, shaping how governments and societies respond to the threats of political violence and international terrorism. To some, Carlos is a figure of fascination, a man whose exploits captured the imagination and defined an era. To others, he is a chilling reminder of the human capacity for destruction in the name of ideology. His legacy is one of both infamy and intrigue, a life that stands as a stark warning of the thin line between conviction and chaos. And so, as history continues to judge Carlos the Jackal, his story remains a haunting chapter in the annals of modern terrorism. A tale of a man who embraced the shadows and paid the ultimate price for his dark ambitions. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution.